In the summer of 2015, Dubai's skyline glittered like a handful of diamonds scattered across the desert. The city pulsed with money, ambition, and secrets that the rich and powerful preferred to keep buried. But some secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface, no matter how deep you try to hide them. This is the story of two men whose friendship would destroy everything they held dear. It's about trust, betrayal, and the kind of forbidden relationship that happens behind closed doors in the most respectable families. What started as an innocent reunion between old friends ended with a young woman fighting for her life in a pool of her own blood. Majid Halwani was the kind of man who believed in doing the right thing, even when it cost him. At 53, he had worked for the Sharjah government for over 20 years, earning a steady but modest salary that kept his family comfortable without making them rich. His apartment in Al Nada was small but clean, with traditional furniture his wife Huda had chosen when they first married. Every morning, Majid woke before dawn for his prayers, then spent an hour drinking tea and reading the newspaper before heading to work. He was proud of the life he had built through honest work and careful saving. His greatest treasure was his daughter Basel, who had just graduated with a degree in international business from the American University of Sharjah. At 23, Basel was everything Majid had dreamed his daughter would become. She was intelligent, respectful, and full of plans for her future. She wanted to start her own import business, connecting Middle Eastern suppliers with international markets. Majid supported her dreams completely, though he sometimes worried about the challenges a young woman would face in the business world. Basel had her mother's gentle nature but her father's stubborn determination. She spent her evenings researching successful entrepreneurs, building her network on social media, and refining her business plans. She was close to both her parents and had never given them reason to worry about her judgment or her values. In their traditional household, she was the perfect daughter who balanced modern ambitions with respect for family expectations. Meanwhile, across the city in the exclusive neighborhood of Jumeirah Islands, Nasser Al Fardan was living a completely different kind of life. At 50, he had climbed the ranks of international banking to become one of Dubai's most successful financial executives. His waterfront villa was worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, with imported marble floors, designer furniture, and a view of the man-made lakes that made Jumeirah Islands one of Dubai's most desirable addresses. Nasser carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had never worried about money. His suits were tailored in London, his watches were Swiss, and his social circle included some of the most powerful people in the Emirates. He was married to an elegant woman who moved easily in Dubai's high society, and their children attended the most exclusive international schools. From the outside, Nasser appeared to be the perfect example of the Dubai dream made real. 20 years earlier, Nasser and Majid had been close friends working at the same company in Abu Dhabi. They were both young men then, full of hopes and plans for the future. They had supported each other through difficult times, shared meals when money was tight, and celebrated each other's successes. But as their careers took different paths, they had gradually lost touch. Nasser's rise in the banking world had pulled him into a different social class, while Majid had chosen the security of government work over the uncertainty of private business. For nearly 10 years, the two men had not spoken until a mutual friend's death brought them together again. Ahmed al-Rashid had worked with both of them in the old days, and his sudden heart attack shocked everyone who knew him. The funeral was held at a mosque in Dubai, and both Majid and Nasser came to pay their respects to their old colleague. When they saw each other across the mosque courtyard after the service, there was a moment of recognition followed by genuine warmth. Despite the years and the changes in their circumstances, they were still the same two men who had once been brothers in everything but blood. They embraced in the traditional way and spent over an hour catching up on their families, their work, and the paths their lives had taken. Nasser seemed genuinely interested in hearing about Basel's graduation and her business plans. He asked thoughtful questions and offered encouragement, suggesting that Dubai was full of opportunities for smart, educated young people like her. When they parted that day, they exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch this time. 2 weeks later, Nasser called with an invitation for the Halwani family to visit his home for dinner. He wanted to meet Basel properly and hear more about her business ideas. Majid was touched by his old friend's interest in his daughter's future, and he looked forward to renewing their friendship after so many years apart. Neither man could have predicted that this simple dinner invitation would set in motion a chain of events that would destroy both their families and leave a young woman permanently scarred by the betrayal of someone she had been taught to trust. The first dinner at Nasser's villa went better than anyone had expected. Basel was nervous about meeting such wealthy people, but Nasser and his wife made the Halwani family feel genuinely welcome. What impressed Basel most was how seriously Nasser listened to her business ideas. While most adults her age either dismissed her plans or offered empty encouragement, Nasser asked detailed questions about her target markets, profit margins, and growth strategies. He treated her like a real businesswoman, not just his friend's young daughter. Over the following weeks, Nasser began reaching out to Basel directly with professional opportunities. He forwarded job listings from his banking contacts, sent her articles about successful women entrepreneurs in the Middle East, and even offered to review her resume. Basel was thrilled by his attention and support. Her father had always believed in her dreams, but Nasser had the connections and experience to actually help make them happen. The first real opportunity came when Nasser arranged an interview for Basel at an international trading company in Dubai International Financial Center. He spent 2 hours on the phone with her the night before, helping her prepare answers to potential questions and explaining the company's business model. Basel felt more confident walking into that interview than she had ever felt before. Although she didn't get the job, the experience taught her valuable lessons about presenting herself professionally in Dubai's competitive business environment. Nasser's help extended beyond just job opportunities. He offered to help Basel create a professional LinkedIn profile that would showcase her education and ambitions. They met at a cafe in Dubai Mall to work on it together, and Basel was amazed by how well Nasser understood the importance of professional networking. He showed her how to connect with industry leaders, how to write posts that would get attention, and how to present herself as a serious business professional despite her limited work experience. Basel's parents were grateful for Nasser's interest in their daughter's career. Majid often told his wife how lucky they were to have such a successful friend who was willing to help Basel navigate the business world. Huda sometimes worried that they were taking advantage of Nasser's generosity, but Majid assured her that Nasser genuinely enjoyed mentoring young people and that his help was freely given. What Basel didn't realize was how carefully Nasser was studying her reactions to his attention. He noticed how her eyes lit up when he complimented her intelligence, how she blushed when he told her she was more mature than most women her age, and how eagerly she absorbed his advice about everything from business strategy to professional appearance. He was building her trust and dependence on him, one conversation at a time. The WhatsApp messages started innocently enough. Nasser would send Basel articles about business opportunities or ask how her job search was progressing. But gradually, the messages became more frequent and more personal. He began asking about her daily routine, her interests outside of work, and her thoughts on topics that had nothing to do with business. Basel found herself looking forward to these messages and responding immediately whenever they arrived. Late-night conversations became a regular pattern. Nasser would message Basel around 10 or 11 in the evening, when she was in her room preparing for bed. He would ask about her day, share stories from his own work, and gradually steer the conversation toward more personal topics. He began telling her things about his marriage, his disappointments, and his feelings that he claimed he had never shared with anyone else. Basel felt honored by his trust and began sharing her own private thoughts and feelings in return. Nasser was masterful at making Basel feel special and chosen. He told her she was different from other young women he had met, more intelligent and ambitious than most people twice her age. He compared her favorably to his own daughter, who he claimed was spoiled and lacked Basel's drive and maturity. He suggested that Basel's traditional upbringing had given her a rare combination of modern ambition and timeless values that would serve her well in the business world. The conversations gradually became more intimate. Nasser began complimenting Basel's appearance, commenting on photos she shared on social media, and asking questions about her personal life that crossed professional boundaries. He was careful to frame these comments as observations from someone who cared about her success and wanted to help her present herself effectively in business settings. Basel found herself thinking about Nasser more often than she should have. She looked forward to his messages and felt disappointed when he didn't contact her for a day or two. She began to see him not just as her father's friend or her professional mentor, but as someone who understood her in ways that no one else did. The 27-year age difference seemed less important than their intellectual connection and shared ambitions. The first secret meeting happened almost by accident. Basel was in Al Wasl area for a job interview when Nasser messaged her asking about her location. When she mentioned where she was, he suggested they meet for coffee at a nearby cafe to discuss how the interview had gone. Basel agreed without thinking about the implications of meeting him alone, away from their families. Sitting across from Nasser in the small cafe, Basel felt a different kind of energy between them. Without the presence of their families, their conversation became more intimate and personal. Nasser leaned closer when he spoke, maintained eye contact longer than necessary, and touched her hand briefly when making a point. Basel felt her heart racing and realized that her feelings for him had crossed a line she hadn't even recognized existed. That afternoon in the cafe, something fundamental changed between them. They both acknowledged, without saying it directly, that their relationship had become something more than friendship or mentorship. Nasser suggested they continue meeting occasionally to discuss Basel's career progress, but they both knew that professional development was no longer the real reason for these meetings. Within a month, Nasser had arranged a more permanent solution to their need for privacy. He had access to a furnished apartment in Business Bay that was registered under one of his company's subsidiary names. He told Basel it was a place where he sometimes stayed when working late, but she understood its real purpose the moment she walked through the door. This was where their secret relationship would unfold, away from the eyes of their families and the judgment of their community. Standing in that apartment for the first time, Basel knew she was crossing a line that would change everything. But Nasser had made her feel so special, so chosen, that she convinced herself this was love rather than manipulation. She was 23 and believed she was mature enough to handle whatever came next. She had no idea that she was walking into a trap that had been carefully constructed by a man who had perfected the art of seduction over many years. For the first few months, Basel felt like she was living in a dream. The apartment in Business Bay became her escape from the ordinary world of family dinners and job applications. When she was with Nasser, she felt sophisticated and desired in ways she had never experienced before. He made her feel like the most important person in his life, showering her with attention that felt intoxicating after years of being treated like a child by most adults. Basel convinced herself that what they had was real love, not just an affair. She told herself that age was just a number and that their intellectual connection was more important than social expectations. When guilt crept into her thoughts, she pushed it away by focusing on how mature and special Nasser made her feel. She began to imagine a future where they could be together openly, perhaps after she had established her career and proven her independence to her family. Nasser was careful to reinforce these feelings by treating Basel like a princess whenever they were together. He brought her expensive jewelry from the gold souks, perfumes from Paris, and designer handbags that cost more than her father earned in a month. He took her to five-star restaurants in Dubai Marina and luxury spas in Jumeirah where she felt like she belonged in a world far above her modest upbringing. These experiences made Basel feel like she was getting a glimpse of the life she could have if she stayed with him. The gifts and experiences were just part of how Nasser maintained control over the relationship. He was always the one who decided when they would meet, where they would go, and how long they would spend together. Basel found herself constantly checking her phone, waiting for his messages and adjusting her schedule around his availability. She began to structure her entire life around the possibility that he might want to see her, canceling plans with friends and family whenever he called. As the months passed, their meetings became more frequent and more risky. They no longer limited themselves to the Business Bay apartment. Nasser would book rooms at luxury hotels around Dubai, each one chosen for its discretion and privacy. They met at the Burj Al Arab, the Atlantis, and boutique hotels in Old Dubai where foreign tourists provided perfect cover for their secret encounters. Basel was amazed by these expensive locations, but she didn't realize that Nasser was documenting their meetings with photos and videos on his phone. The deception required to maintain their relationship became increasingly complex. Basel had to lie constantly to her parents about where she was going and who she was meeting. She created fake job interviews, imaginary networking events, and fictional study groups to explain her frequent absences. When her mother asked why she was dressing so nicely for simple errands, Basel claimed she was trying to maintain a professional appearance for unexpected business opportunities. Her father Majid was particularly easy to deceive because he trusted his daughter completely and was proud of her apparent dedication to building her career. When Basel told him she was meeting with business contacts or attending professional development seminars, he encouraged her to take advantage of every opportunity. He had no reason to suspect that his respectful, traditional daughter was living a completely different life behind his back. The constant lying began to take its toll on Basel's relationship with her family. She became distant and irritable at home, spending most of her time in her room texting with Nasser or preparing for their next meeting. Her mother noticed the change but attributed it to the stress of job hunting in a competitive market. Basel felt guilty about deceiving her parents, but the excitement of her secret life with Nasser seemed worth the emotional cost. After nearly a year of regular meetings, Basel began to notice changes in Nasser's behavior that made her anxious. He started canceling their plans more frequently, claiming he was busy with work or family obligations. When they did meet, he seemed distracted and less interested in their conversations. The romantic gestures that had once made her feel special became less frequent, and he stopped bringing her expensive gifts or taking her to luxury locations. Basel tried to convince herself that Nasser was just going through a stressful period at work, but deep down she sensed that his feelings for her were cooling. She became more demanding of his time and attention, sending longer messages and calling him more frequently. She suggested they take a weekend trip together or that he leave his wife to be with her permanently. These suggestions seemed to irritate Nasser, and he began to respond with shorter, colder messages. What Basel didn't know was that Nasser had already begun planning his exit from their relationship. He had grown tired of the complications and risks involved in maintaining the affair, and he was concerned that Basel was becoming too emotionally attached. He began reducing his digital communications with her, deleting old messages and being more careful about leaving evidence of their relationship on his phone. The apartment in Business Bay, which had once felt like their private paradise, began to feel like a prison to Basel. She would sit there waiting for Nasser to arrive, sometimes for hours, only to have him cancel at the last minute. When he did show up, their meetings became shorter and more mechanical. The man who had once made her feel like the center of his universe now treated her like an inconvenience he needed to manage. Basel's world began to crumble as she realized that the relationship she had sacrificed everything for was slipping away. She became desperate to recapture Nasser's attention, sending him increasingly emotional messages and making demands that only pushed him further away. She had given up friendships, deceived her family, and compromised her values for a man who was now treating her like a burden rather than a treasure. The guilt she had been suppressing for months began to overwhelm her, and she found herself crying alone in the apartment where she had once felt so happy and loved. The secret that had once felt like the most exciting thing in her life was becoming a source of constant anxiety and pain. Basel knew something had to change, but she had no idea that the end of their affair would come in a way that would destroy everything she held dear. The end came on a Tuesday evening in March 2016, almost exactly 1 year after Basel and Nasser's affair had begun. Basel was in the shower when her phone buzzed with a calendar notification on the kitchen counter. Her mother Huda was preparing dinner when she heard the sound and glanced at the device. The notification was innocent enough, a reminder about a university alumni meeting, but when Huda touched the screen to dismiss it, she accidentally opened Basel's WhatsApp instead. What Huda saw made her blood freeze. The most recent message was a voice note from a contact saved simply as N with a heart emoji. Something about the secrecy of the saved name made Huda's motherly instinct scream that something was wrong. Without thinking, she pressed play on the voice note, and Nasser's unmistakable voice filled the kitchen speaking words that no father's friend should ever say to his daughter. The message was intimate and explicit, filled with references to their last meeting and plans for the next one. Huda's hands shook as she scrolled up through the conversation history, finding months and months of messages that revealed the entire scope of her daughter's deception. There were photos of Basel in hotel rooms, messages arranging secret meetings, and videos that made Huda's stomach turn with revulsion and disbelief. The timeline of lies became clear as Huda read through the messages. Every job interview, every networking event, Every study group that Basel had claimed to attend had been cover stories for meeting with Nasser. The expensive jewelry and clothes that Basel had claimed were gifts from new female friends were actually from him. The confident, successful future her daughter had been building was all based on a relationship that could destroy their family's reputation forever. When Basel emerged from the shower 20 minutes later, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table with the phone in her hands and tears streaming down her face. The look of betrayal and horror in Huda's eyes told Basel immediately that her secret was over. For a moment, neither woman spoke, the weight of the discovery hanging between them like a physical presence. Basel's first instinct was to deny everything, to claim that the messages were fake or that someone had hacked her phone. But the evidence was too overwhelming, and her mother's devastated expression made it clear that lies would only make things worse. Instead, Basel tried to explain that what she had with Nasser was real love, that he understood her in ways no one else did, and that their age difference didn't matter because they connected on an intellectual level. These explanations only made Huda's reaction more intense. She began screaming about the shame Basel had brought on their family, about the betrayal of their trust, and about how Nasser had taken advantage of their hospitality to corrupt their daughter. The cultural implications of the affair were as devastating as the personal ones. In their traditional community, a young woman's reputation was everything, and Basel had thrown hers away for a married man who was old enough to be her father. The screaming brought neighbors to their doors and windows, but Huda was beyond caring about who might overhear. 23 years of love and trust had been shattered in a single moment, and the daughter she thought she knew had revealed herself to be a stranger capable of breathtaking deception. Basel's attempts to calm her mother only made things worse, as each word seemed to emphasize how long and how carefully she had been lying to them. When Huda's rage reached its peak, she grabbed a small paring knife from the counter where she had been preparing vegetables for dinner. Later, she would claim she only meant to threaten Basel, to make her understand the seriousness of what she had done. But in that moment of overwhelming emotion, her control snapped completely. She lunged at her daughter with the knife, slashing at Basel's left arm and side before Basel could react. Basel screamed and tried to defend herself, but the small kitchen gave her nowhere to run. The knife caught her again across the forearm, severing a nerve and sending blood spraying across the white kitchen walls. Basel collapsed near the refrigerator, pressing her hands against the wounds while blood pooled beneath her on the tile floor. Majid burst through the front door just as Basel fell, having heard the screaming from the parking lot where he was returning from work. The scene that greeted him was beyond his worst nightmares. His wife stood frozen with a bloody knife in her hand, and his daughter lay crumpled on the floor in a spreading pool of blood. For several seconds, he couldn't process what he was seeing or understand how his peaceful home had become a crime scene. The next few minutes passed in a blur of emergency phone calls and desperate attempts to stop Basel's bleeding. Majid called for an ambulance while trying to apply pressure to his daughter's wounds with kitchen towels that quickly became soaked with blood. Neighbors who had heard the screaming began gathering outside their apartment, and the news of what had happened spread through their building like wildfire. Basel was conscious but going into shock by the time the paramedics arrived. The knife had severed a major nerve in her left arm and caused significant muscle damage that would require multiple surgeries to repair. The blood loss was serious enough that doctors later said she came close to dying on the kitchen floor of her family home. As Basel was loaded into the ambulance, Huda finally seemed to understand the magnitude of what she had done. The rage that had consumed her was replaced by horror at seeing her daughter's blood on her hands and clothes. She began screaming Basel's name and trying to follow the stretcher, but police officers held her back for questioning about the attack. The hospital became a nightmare of emergency surgeries, police interviews, and medical consultations about the permanent damage to Basel's arm and hand. The knife had destroyed nerves that controlled movement in her fingers, and doctors warned that she might never regain full use of her left hand. The young woman who had once dreamed of conquering the business world was now fighting just to survive the consequences of her secret affair. Basel survived, but the woman who woke up in Dubai hospital 3 days later was not the same person who had collapsed on her kitchen floor. The surgeries had saved her life, but the damage to her left hand was permanent. The severed nerve could not be fully repaired, leaving her with limited movement in her fingers and a constant reminder of that terrible night. Doctors also discovered that muscle damage in her leg from falling would require months of physical therapy, and she might always walk with a slight limp. The physical injuries were devastating enough, but the emotional trauma cut even deeper. Basel's dreams of starting her own business seemed impossible now. How could she negotiate deals or sign contracts when she struggled to hold a pen for more than a few minutes? The confident young woman who had once planned to conquer the business world now spent her days in bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering how her life had gone so wrong. The relationship with her family was shattered beyond repair. Her father Majid could barely look at her without seeing the betrayal of everything he had taught her about honor and respect. Her mother Huda was consumed by guilt over the attack but also by anger that refused to fade. The small apartment in Al Nada became a prison of silence and recrimination where 3 people tried to live with the wreckage of their destroyed trust. While Basel fought for her life in the hospital, the man who had caused all this destruction was making his escape. When police went to question Nasser 2 days after the attack, they found his Jumeirah Islands villa locked and empty. Neighbors reported seeing moving trucks the day before, and airport records showed that Nasser had left Dubai on a private flight to Cyprus just hours after news of Basel's attack began spreading through their social circle. Nasser had used his banking connections and diplomatic contacts to arrange his escape with remarkable speed and efficiency. He had clearly been planning for this possibility, perhaps sensing that the affair would eventually be discovered. He left behind no explanation, no apology, and no acknowledgement of the role he had played in destroying 2 families. His wife and children woke up one morning to find themselves abandoned and humiliated, with neighbors and friends asking questions they could not answer. The media coverage of the incident was carefully controlled and sanitized. Dubai's newspapers reported only that a prominent banker had left the country amid a family dispute, and that a young woman had been injured in a domestic incident. The full truth of the affair, the grooming, and the betrayal was buried beneath euphemisms and vague references that protected the powerful while offering no justice to the victims. Within Dubai's expatriate community, however, the real story spread quickly through whispered conversations and social media messages. The reaction was mixed and often cruel. Some people blamed Basel for pursuing a married man, while others pointed fingers at her parents for not watching their daughter more carefully. Few seemed to understand that a 50-year-old man in a position of power had systematically manipulated and exploited a young woman who trusted him as a family friend. The case exposed uncomfortable truths about power, wealth, and justice in Dubai's elite circles. Nasser's money and connections had allowed him to escape consequences for his actions, while Basel and her family were left to deal with the permanent damage he had caused. The wealthy banker who had preyed on his friend's daughter was now living comfortably in Cyprus, probably already planning his next opportunity to start over with a clean reputation. For Basel, there would be no starting over. The nerve damage in her hand meant she would never regain full mobility, and the emotional scars would take years to heal. She began seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma, but progress was slow and painful. Some days she could barely get out of bed, overwhelmed by grief for the life she had lost and anger at herself for trusting someone who had seen her only as an object to be used and discarded. The young woman who had once dreamed of building a business empire now struggled with basic daily tasks. Writing was difficult, typing was painful, and even simple activities like cooking or getting dressed required effort and planning. She was 24 years old and felt like her life was already over before it had really begun. But Basel was stronger than she knew. Slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild her sense of self-worth and purpose. She started volunteering with organizations that helped young women avoid predatory relationships, using her own experience to educate others about the warning signs she had missed. She learned to type with one hand and began writing about her experience, hoping that sharing her story might prevent other young women from making the same mistakes. The scars on her arm and hand would always be visible reminders of that terrible night in March 2016. But they also became symbols of her survival and her determination to create something meaningful from the wreckage of her dreams. Basel had learned the hardest way possible that some betrayals leave permanent marks, but she had also discovered that survival itself could be a form of victory against those who tried to destroy her.